Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. This podcast is going to be in two parts. I'm re-recording the first part because every time I've almost completed it, I get a call from a friend who wants to know how I'm doing. I'm still in the hospital. Everything's going in the right direction. Let me start off by saying that. Healing properly. It's just going to be a really long process because I have this open wound that technically is prone to infection, but they've got it covered up. And they change the bandaging every couple days. I'm slowly getting my mobility back. I'm walking with a walker. I'll be moving to a rehab center later this week. And we'll also have my laptop with me there and access to the 5 interviews, as I said in the last interview episode, where I can start putting out great interviews that I did right before Christmas, knowing that we were going into the holiday season of Christmas and New Year's. So I banked like 5 shows, and they're all fantastic. I can't wait to share them with you. So I'll be on a more regular schedule in the days and weeks ahead. Also, Tuesday, the 15th, there's going to be some technical maintenance going on because Word Balloon, moving forward, is going to be completely on Spreaker. It shouldn't affect things if you're subscribing. There is going to be an additional feed to subscribe to, though, and that's Word Balloon Classic, which features the first 500 or so episodes of the 830 episodes I've done since September of 2006. That's when the current RSS feed went up, even though Word Balloon started in May of 2005. But I'll ask you to resubscribe to the classic feed so you can get access to a lot of the old episodes. We just had trouble moving them to Spreaker. So the solution is to have the current feed still on Spreaker, as well as where it currently is at Blog Talk Radio, previously on Libsyn. And then the older episodes are going to be available on this Word Balloon Classic feed. So I hope you'll subscribe to that as well, and you can get access to the first Bendis tapes and first conversations with Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams and the great Gene Colan and Kurt Busiek, the only time I'll ever get Kurt Busiek on my podcast. Really great stuff in the original feed. And it's been inaccessible up until these moves we're making on Spreaker on Tuesday. So I'll let you know via social media when the new feed is up and running. And please, like I said, resubscribe to Word Balloon. And I'll be making this plea as well on subsequent episodes. But today, it's all about Q&A. I got some great questions from listeners, just like I did last time, even more so. So, again, it's a two-parter, and I'm re-recording this first part so I can accommodate people and you can hear a complete show. But the second part is 80 minutes long and is really the bulk of the questions. This portion of Word Balloon is brought to you by not In Stock Trades. This portion of Word Balloon is brought to you by Aftershock Comics, our good friends at Aftershock Comics who have been helping me out. And they got a great new slate of books coming in 2019, and along with their current crop as well. Some of the great writers at Aftershock Comics, they're all recognizable names. I know you know these people. We're talking about Garth Ennis and Cullen Bunn and Frank Thierry and Adam Glass and Paul Jenkins and Marguerite Bennett and Phil Hester. So many great creators that you already know and trust with their wonderful work at DC and Marvel. Well, they're doing a lot of fresh concepts here at Aftershock Comics. You want to check them out. There are great books, great genres. Be bold in 2019. Do yourself a favor. Sure, we all love our DC and Marvel books, but be experimental. Check out some of the great books at Aftershock Comics. You'll find preview pages and the diamond codes on how to order these books through your local comic shop at AftershockComics.com. Word Balloon is also brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your support via Patreon. If you want to subscribe to Word Balloon, you'd certainly be helping me out in this time when I am down and am not able to give my radio hours, but I am able to do my podcast hours. So if you'd like to help the cause, Word Balloon is free. It will always be free. But if you have a couple spare shekels you can spare, you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon. Subscribe to Word Balloon. Is it worth $1 a month to you? Is it worth the price of a comic book a month to you? I certainly hope so. But thank you very much for your support, especially in this time of need, League of Word Balloon listeners. All right, let's get started. Funny stuff, great questions here, both real ones that are head scratchers and also just some fun questions as well. My buddy Steve Rotterdam wants to know, who do I like better, Jeannie from I Dream of Jeannie or Samantha from Bewitched? Now, hard question. I got to be honest. And forgive me if this is getting into sexist territory, but I know what he means. They were two beautiful women, and when you were kids and you were sick, these were our go-to shows, Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie reruns. I even remember the last couple of years of Bewitched because it made it to, I was about 10 years old, and I was a big Bewitched fan. I loved Elizabeth Montgomery. She was lovely, but she really was more of a mother figure because of having Tabitha and Adam, her kids. So, and I'll tell you, though, as far as having a crush on Elizabeth Montgomery, if you watch her pre-Bewitched stuff from the late 50s and early 60s, man, she was a lovely, beautiful blonde, sometimes a good girl, sometimes a femme fatale. She was great in an episode of one of my favorite early 60s TV shows called Johnny Staccato, kind of a beatnik piano player that John Cassavetes played. And she's great in that and starts off as a girl next door and then becomes kind of a little femme fatale at the end and gets a little sexy with Cassavetes. She's lovely. Jeannie, though, man, that's every guy's dream. A beautiful woman at your beck and call and can grant you any wish that you want and is so lovely and in love with you and everything. Plus, it was astronauts. Major Nelson, Major Healy, man, right in the middle of the space program. So I was a huge NASA fan and a huge NASA kid. So I loved I Dream of Jeannie. I actually got to meet Barbara Eden. She came to our sports talk station in the 90s and still a very beautiful woman, tiny, very, very tiny. And was wearing platform shoes and still very, very tiny, like probably barely 5 feet tall. And I thought I was paying her a compliment, but again, dumb guys. And I know women are just shaking their heads when you hear this, but I'm like, oh, Miss Eden, I must confess you were one of my first crushes as a child. And she looked at me like she was my fourth grade science teacher, and I just threw a spitball or something like that. And just had this very frowny face and said, really, isn't that charming? So obviously I kind of offended Jeannie, but I still love her. And I still, man, again, pre-I Dream of Jeannie, check out things like the beach movie she made called Ride the Wild Surf. And also, of course, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, the original movie with Walter Pidgeon and Peter Lorre and Frankie Avalon. The movie's even better than the TV series. And, of course, Barbara Eden doesn't hurt. And her episode of Andy Griffith where she's the manicurist at Floyd's Barber. Good stuff, man. She was lovely. So if I really have to pick between Jeannie or Samantha, it's got to be Jeannie. John Swinnimer. And I'm sorry, John, if I'm not saying your name right, but you're a good, loyal League of Word Balloon listener as well. What are my thoughts on the new Chuck Wepner film called The Brawler that's coming out soon? I watched the trailer. I wasn't even aware of this until you asked the question. It confused me because it looks fine. It looks interesting. But there was already a good independent movie about the life of Chuck Wepner that came out a while ago that Liev Schreiber did, and it's called Chuck. I know it's been on Showtime. A great movie, a really, really interesting movie. And Chuck Wepner has a great story. If people don't know who I'm talking about, Chuck Wepner was a 60s and 70s heavyweight contender, kind of a fringe contender, but fighting in the best era of heavyweights. Got great wins and had some dynamic losses. Was known as the Bayonne Bleeder because he had very porous skin that if you hit him the right way, he'd start bleeding, literally. And there's some really gross pictures of him after fights where it looks like somebody took an axe to his face. I'm not kidding. One of the worst bleeders I've ever seen in boxing. Well, after Ali beat Foreman in the great upset in Zaire, the Rumble in the Jungle, he was looking for an easy tune-up fight afterwards to keep himself in shape but not really press himself too hard. And Don King promoted it. And Don was still, well, I shouldn't say was still because he at that point had been paroled from jail. But he had heavy connections with the Cleveland mob. And Chuck Wepner was their fighter. So it was kind of convenient for Ali and convenient for King to set up the fight with Chuck. It was a very boring fight. Ali had this easily won. But all of a sudden in the 15th round, Wepner stepped on Ali's foot and punched him at the same time and got Ali to fall over and basically scored a knockdown. He got up right away. But still, Chuck Wepner knocked down the champion of the world. Well, that became the inspiration for a great movie because among the people who saw the fight on closed circuit TV was a young actor named Sylvester Stallone. And that's where he got the idea from Rocky. And has been pretty public in saying it was the Ali-Chuck Wepner fight that inspired the first Rocky story of Rocky fighting Apollo Creed. There's a great 30 for 30 that ESPN did, a great documentary with Wepner. Wepner tells the story himself. It became a point of contention. First, it was a badge of honor. knowing that Rocky was based on his life, but he never saw a dime. And obviously Stallone made millions from the Rocky franchise. And ultimately, Wepner felt like he deserved a cut. Kind of like a comic book creator working for hire and creating a great superhero and never seeing a dime of the millions that were made from the TV or movies. So they went to court, and the good news is Wepner did get an out-of-court settlement. Nobody knows the amount of money. Neither Stallone or Wepner are talking. That was part of the settlement, that they never say how much money it was. But, Chuck got his story out there, and Chuck got his payday finally. So the story ends happily. Now, I don't know if he's involved with this new movie, The Brawler, or if he was involved with the previous movie, Chuck. But I'll wait and see. If the critics say it's a good movie, I'll check it out. If not, I'll wait till it's streaming, and I'll check it out then. I mean, I got to say, I've been a big fan of a lot of the boxing movies that have come out in the last few years. I think they've all been excellent. Let's move on to Alex Chung, who kind of still talks about boxing, but brings comic books back into the fray as well. He asked which comic book depicts boxing's moments best. And just in general, he asked, I have to say the first issue of Daredevil and the story of the fall of Jack Murdock, Daredevil's father, is incredibly well done in the comic. Wally Wood did a beautiful job drawing it. Stan Grady did a great job writing the scenes. I have a feeling it was based on a boxing movie from the late 40s called The Setup, starring Robert Ryan. It was directed by Robert Weiss, who also directed such varied things as The Day the Earth Stood Still, the first Star Trek movie of 1979, the musical The Sound of Music, a very talented, underappreciated director from Hollywood's golden era. He was also the editor of Citizen Kane and Magnificent Ambersons for Orson Welles, Robert Wise. But much like the story of Jack Murdock, in The Setup, a broken-down fighter is asked to throw a fight and fix it for an up-and-coming contender. But in the case of Jack Murdock and in Daredevil, he couldn't let his son see him lose. And I think it was a beautiful portrayal of a fighter and his dignity. And he put it together, and he ends up knocking the kid out. It's a great moment for Jack Murdock. It's a proud moment for Matt Murdock. And then, of course, unfortunately, the Fixer's men follow Jack Murdock into the alley, and they kill him. Great drama. Amazing stuff. Both in the film The Setup and also in Daredevil #1. So that would be my ultimate all-time favorite comic book adaptation of boxing. However, Sergeant Rock's origin, that's how Sergeant Rock got his nickname, Rock. He was a fighter that would win as much as he would lose, but you couldn't knock him out. He refused to go down. So they called him that he was tough as a rock. Also, there's, of course, the classic Superman versus Muhammad Ali comic from the 70s. That's a terrific boxing comic. Both Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams really nailed the action, got the spirit of Ali. You see Superman in action. It's a great comic book. And, in fact, inspiration for Tom King's current run of Superman that's happening in the Walmart comics. He had a great new Superman fighting an alien boxer moment in one of the stories, and it was a great depiction. And then, of course, there is the amazing montage of scenes in The New Frontier featuring Wildcat, Ted Grant, the former heavyweight champion's last fight, and he's fighting an up-and-coming, undefeated Cassius Clay. And that's just great boxing drama at its best. It's happening in Vegas. If you haven't read it, I'll leave it at that. And if you have, you know what I'm talking about. It's a tremendous scene. And it's a great way for Wildcat to have his final fight in the ring. Certainly not his final fight as a superhero. But it was a beautiful moment for Ted Grant. And Ted Grant is absolutely one of my all-time favorite characters. My buddy Ashley Robinson wants to know who my favorite, or I should say, who the best speedster is and why. Now, Ashley's a great writer. She and Jason Inman are a power couple. They did Jupiter Jet, a great book that they kickstarted, and also their recent Kickstarter for the book Science, which is kind of a combination of Hogwarts Academy and Starfleet Academy, if you will. Sounds like a really great idea, and I was happy to help them promote their idea. Best speedster and why? Well, let's go in reverse order and start with number 9 on my list, and that's Max Mercury. Now, I respect Max's position in the Flashverse. I like the idea that he mentored Impulse and is this great classic speedster. I would love to see flashback stories of Max in his prime, fighting in the DC universe. Wouldn't that be interesting to watch and see him in action against maybe a Vandal Savage or some of the other older DC villains? I think that would be terrific. But I don't know. He's at the bottom of my list because I think the role also could have been covered by Jay Garrick, but instead we got Max mentoring Impulse. At number 8, I've got Bart Allen, Impulse himself. I respect the character, but as an older reader, younger characters, I don't know. I'll be interested to see what I think of Bendis' Young Justice coming up, because usually I'm a tough sell when it comes to kid books. I was even like that about the original Young Justice comic, and even the Teen Titans for that matter. Whizzer, the great Marvel timely speedster of the 30s and 40s, he's at number 7. Quicksilver's at number 6. There was always something jerky about Quicksilver, and they continue to write him that way in Marvel. And I get it, and I'm glad, because you want a difference between, characters, and everyone doesn't have to be, a great superhero in their own right. But Quicksilver just has too many quirks for me to really get behind him any higher than number 6. At 5, Jessie Quick, the daughter of Johnny Quick. I like her. She's a legacy character. I respect her. But she can't hold a candle to her father. Great character from the Silver Age. Johnny Quick, I've always enjoyed the reprint stories that I've read in Flash 100-page spectaculars and the like. And loved his portrayal in The New Frontier, or rather not The New Frontier, The Golden Age, the James Robinson story about a lot of the Golden Age heroes in the post-World War II era. I love that story. So Johnny Quick's at number 4. Jay Garrick's at number 3. To me, the true mentor of the Flashverse. Certainly a mentor to Barry and to Wally as well. There was nothing more exciting than reading when the three of them would team up and fight different people. And plus, I always loved Jay's role as a mentor in the Justice Society in the hands of people like Jeff Johns, where, again, Jay and Alan Scott and Hugh Grant, Ted Grant, and, of course, the Golden Age Wonder Woman, and even Ma Hunkel, as great mentors to the younger heroes. I appreciate that position that Jay has in the DC universe. Now number 2 and number 1, and this is where it gets a little controversial. I understand the love for Wally West. People slightly younger than me, people in their 40s and slightly younger, we all feel like we grew up with Wally West. And certainly if you were reading comics during Crisis on Infinite Earths and Barry died and Wally has to step up and become the Flash, that was an interesting and great shock. It was a great shot in the arm for the Flash series to now follow Wally trying to live up to the legacy of his uncle and best friend, Barry. It was terrific. It was excellent. But I felt a little bit older because I spent more time with Barry before Wally got started. I've always loved Wally's Kid Flash. I love the yellow and red Kid Flash uniform. I love the current uniform that Wally has. I'm very interested to see how Heroes in Crisis pans out with Tom King, to see where Wally ends up. I don't believe he's really dead. We'll see what happens. But regardless, I do love Wally a lot, but I love Barry that much more because Barry in the hands in the 1970s of the great Cary Bates, the wonderful writer of The Flash, that was great stuff, man. And Cary Bates just did a great job with Barry. And it was the 1970s, and you can argue that characters weren't as fleshed out as they became in the 80s and subsequent decades. But I would argue that Cary Bates had a very nuanced approach to The Flash, and he was very much an individual. I love the trial of The Flash, the final story. And not only, don't take my word for it, take Jeff Johns' word for it. He loved Barry Allen in the hands of Cary Bates. And I'm sure that was one of the reasons why, when it was time for Rebirth, that he felt it was necessary to bring Barry back and be the Flash. Again, I know it's very controversial. I know there are a lot of Wally fans out there, and I don't blame you. Wally's a great, great character. But it's usually the original, kind of like the Bonds. Kind of my love for Sean Connery. As great as Daniel Craig is and other subsequent Bonds, you can't beat the original. And even though Jay technically is the original, Barry ushered in the Silver Age. I've always loved Barry Allen. I just always found him interesting. I appreciated that he was a police forensic scientist at a time that I didn't even know what forensic science meant, but that fascinated me as well, that he was a police scientist. Great stuff, man. So I'm a huge fan of Barry's, and that's why he's number one in my book. W. Blaine Dowler asks, what non-comics creator would I love to have on Word Balloon? I would say Noah, is it Hawley? I'm sorry, I had it written down earlier, and I can't read my own writing right now. But the guy that created Legion on FX, that's such a groundbreaking show. I mean, I think you're talking about the level of storytelling on things like The Prisoner in the 60s, and so unconventional in its presentation. I am fascinated by this guy. I would love to talk to him about how he makes television. So that's my answer, Blaine. Robert Lee Jefferson Kofi asks, what are my favorite current books that I'm enjoying? Martian Manhunter by Steve Orlando, also Electric Warriors. I love Ta-Nehisi Coates' Captain America. I'm loving Bendis' Superman. I'm loving Tom King's books, Batman, Mr. Miracle, Heroes in Crisis. I'm enjoying Doomsday Clock. Those are things right off the top of my head that I can say. Loved Hey Kids Comics. Howard Chaykin just wrapped that up, his Image series. Love what Rick Remender does. Love what Jonathan Hickman does. Jason Aaron. Dan Slott. Gail Simone. Teenie Howard is a new favorite of mine. Really enjoy her work. I love Joelle Jones's Catwoman. So there's a nice little laundry list of what I'm reading right now, Robert. Moving on, let's see. And I'm sorry, I don't have the name in front of me. But they ask, the DC Hanna-Barbera mashups have been great. Any thoughts on possible Marvel mashups with any cartoon heroes? And who would you want to write and draw them? I have no idea about writing and drawing them. I mean, everyone has surprised me with the DC Hanna-Barbera mashups that they've done. They've been excellent. So, but I would love to see Spider-Man and Animan together. I wouldn't mind seeing the Hulk and Captain Caveman together, or Hulk and Frankenstein Jr. Wouldn't it be interesting to see a futurist conversation between Tony Stark and George Jetson? There's a couple right there as far as Marvel characters who I wouldn't mind seeing team up with some other creators, or I should say creations, of the cartoon world. Okay, moving on. Jeremy Burnett. Thank you, Jeremy, for your question. I appreciate it. He wants to know which Doctor Who is my favorite and what do I think of the newest series. My absolute favorite Doctor going way back would be Tom Baker as far as the classic Doctor Who run. The Fourth Doctor was incredible, so off the wall, such an unconventional character, bohemian, funny at times, brilliant at times, always interesting. A beautiful voice. Tom Baker has one of the greatest voices ever. I was also very fortunate because for the 20th anniversary of Doctor Who, can you imagine? We just had the 50th a couple years ago, but I'm sadly old enough that I remember when it was the 20th anniversary of Doctor Who in the early 80s. Had the pleasure of meeting John Pertwee, the Third Doctor, Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor, and Peter Davison, the Fifth Doctor. They all came on separate public appearances. In the case of Pertwee and Tom Baker, they were solo appearances. Peter Davison came with his wife, Sandra Dickinson, to a comic book store in the city. I wish I could remember which one, but they were great. I had copies of the paperbacks of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for his wife, Sandra, who played Trillian in the original television version of Hitchhikers, which is the first iteration that I had to experience the Hitchhiker's story. And then also Peter Davison, his episodes hadn't reached America yet, but his first novelization of one of his adventures, The Visitation, which featured a photograph of Peter as the Fifth Doctor, had appeared. So I got him to sign that. And Sandra said, "Oh, you should have Peter sign your Hitchhiker's book as well. Didn't you realize Peter was the dish of the day in the television production?" I didn't realize that. I mean, he's all made up with prosthetics, and he's got kind of a pig face and a cow body. It's a very funny scene. But yeah, it's kind of an unbilled cameo. Peter Davison is the dish of the day in the Hitchhiker television production. And he kind of, shyly looked down and was kind of embarrassed. But I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. And Davison could not have been nicer. Great guy. Sandra Dickinson was just lovely as well. Later on that same year, they had a Doctor Who convention. And not only did Davison show up, but John Nathan Turner And companions, Nissa and Tegan, they were lovely. I had crushes on both of them. I was a young 13 or 14-year-old man when I met them. Also, the Brigadier was there, Nicholas Courtney. It was amazing meeting the Brigadier. Such a unit fan. I love that portion of Doctor Who, and that kind of makes me lean towards John Pertwee as my second favorite all-time Doctor, because I love the unit stories. I love the idea of the United Nations kind of fighting aliens and stuff. It was great stuff, man. Just loved it. He was hilarious in his appearance. And in fact, there's a YouTube of John Pertwee on Svengoolie with my buddy Rich Coase. And he's great, camps it up. And, you know, Pertwee was a great hero, great action hero, fantastic Doctor. And Peter Davison was, I appreciated the contrast between him and Baker after he came, and how bombastic Tom Baker was to get into the more subtle approach of Peter Davison. It was still very good stuff. So that's my three favorites of the classic era. In the modern era, I've loved all the Doctors. Again, it's kind of like James Bond. There's no such thing as a bad Doctor Who or James Bond. It all comes down to the writing. And I think Eccleston was well served with great scripts. But David Tennant, I would have to say, hands down, is my favorite Doctor of the new breed. Still loved Matt Smith. Peter Capaldi, it took a while for me to warm up to him, and that was interesting because I'm a longtime Peter Capaldi fan, going back to one of his first movies, a great Scottish movie called Local Hero that was made by Bill Forsyth that featured Peter Riegert of Animal House and The Sopranos and Burt Lancaster. A great, interesting movie about a Houston executive trying to buy up land in this quaint little Scottish town, and he ends up getting seduced and falls in love with the town. And Peter Capaldi, as a very young man, is one of the townspeople. Great movie. I can't recommend it enough. But I don't know, as the Doctor, it took me a while to warm up. I also felt that a lot of the companions stayed around a little too long. I felt that way about Amy and Rory, as much as I loved them both. It got kind of old after a while that they were still there. And I felt the same way, too, about Clara with Capaldi. It just went on too long. And I also kind of felt like they were jerking us around about, is she dead? No, she's not. Yes, she is. All this back and forth shit. I liked Bill with Capaldi, and I started warming up to the Doctor. Loved the way all that wrapped up. And my God, that final episode, that Christmas special with Capaldi and I forget David, whatever his name is, last name, who's been playing the William Hartnell Doctor since. Just terrific. Again, tremendous writing. Great contrast between the first Doctor and the Capaldi Doctor. So that was really great, and wonderful conversations between them. I really like Jodie Whittaker, and if that's her name, and forgive me if I'm getting it wrong, again, kind of going extemporaneously here from the hospital room. But I really do like Jodie Whittaker a lot. She reminds me in the best ways of David Tennant, in the same way that Kate Mulgrew kind of had a Kirk thing going with her Starship Captain portrayal in Star Trek Voyager. So I really like the flavor of Jodie Whittaker, and I like what she represents. I can't decide if I like the group as companions versus just one or two companions. It seems like the TARDIS is a little full these days, and I don't know how I feel about that or not. I'm going to have to revisit this season and get a better handle on it. But I certainly love the direction that Doctor Who is going in, and love what I'm enjoying so far. Now, I'm going to wrap up here. This conversation continues in part 2, which I recorded earlier, but unfortunately was having some technical difficulties. The part 1 recording didn't come out, so I've actually had to record this part 1 a couple times. So you will catch me in mid-thought about David Tennant as I start part 2 on Word Balloon. So do yourself a favor, don't just stop here. If you like what you're hearing, you got another 80 minutes in part 2 of more of these listener questions. Thanks a lot for listening. Great stuff coming up with Word Balloon in the days and weeks ahead, I promise you. And thanks for being on the journey with me, and all the well wishes as well as I recover from this weird infection wound that's going to take months to fully recover. But I will get there, and truly, your support is some of the best medicine I can get out there. So thanks a lot for listening, and check out part 2. I'll talk to you in just a second.